Okay, looks like we have stuff sort of trickling in, so I'll turn it over to David and Victoria.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Hi, everyone. I'm David Murphy from the company Resilient Land and Water. I'll be co-presenting with Victoria Vitri tonight. I think I'll take the first half of the slides and she may take the second half. We have a pretty brief presentation. It's very concise. This is the first of the public information meetings regarding the Mad River Watershed Based Plan, and we'll talk about what that entails in a moment. We have about 16 people in attendance, perhaps a little bit more, 17, and Christine will be the moderator. If there's any problems with the Zoom meeting itself, she'll be on top of that right away. This is being recorded. I think that was a warning that you all received when you entered, but just like to let people know and remind them that this is being recorded for future use. And if you could all keep yourself muted for the time being, that'll help us work through the first few slides smoothly. And the last thing I'll add is we are going to use Mentimeter for some polling. The polling that we do today it's really meant to be an icebreaker. They're fun questions. They don't carry any sort of voting weight to them. But if you all want to get your smartphones ready, whether it's an iPhone or a Droid, you should be able to participate. But that said, it is optional. And when the questions are up on the screen, people can unmute and verbally provide answers to the questions. So we have a quick agenda for tonight, an introduction to the Mad River Watershed itself. We'll talk about impairment, what that means, and what are the legalities surrounding that, and what do we see in the water courses in the watershed. We'll touch on what is a watershed-based plan, what it can be used for, and the benefits of having one. And then we'll briefly touch on elements of the planning process and what's going to happen over the next year and a half. And then, as I said, there'll be some polling questions that are interspersed among the slides. And when we're finished with the slides, we'll go ahead and open the story map so folks can see the landing page that we have prepared for this project. So the watershed itself that we are working within and planning for is, of course, a tributary to the Naugatuck, about 13,000 acres, primarily in southern Bristol, most of Wolcott, and northeastern and eastern Waterbury, and a very small part of Cheshire, where Cheshire meets the Hitchcock Lake part of the watershed. Some of the prominent water bodies in the watershed are Cedar Lake, Scoville, Chestnut Hill, and Hitchcock Lake. And some of the tributaries that are named there on the map, you can see Old Tannery Brook and Lily Brook. And there are many, of course, unnamed tributaries that flow in these communities into the Mad River. For those of you who are brand new to the Mad River and don't know any parts of it, if you've been to the Brass Mill Mall in Waterbury, you've been on top of part of the Mad River. If you've driven along 84, you've driven along part of the Mad River. And our hope through this project is that people will come to know and love other parts of the river, not only those segments. So we're going to be getting ready with our first polling question. And if you've got your iPhone or your Droid, go to menti.com and enter this number that you see right here. Uh, Hopefully someone's monitoring the chat while I'm speaking. You can also use the QR code. Again, this is optional. And as we advance through the slides, the questions will appear on your phone, and it's a way to participate remotely. Give folks a few more seconds with this. Our hope is many folks have used Menti already in the past. All right. Now, the menti.com and the code itself are going to stay at the top of the screen. So if you're joining late or if you know somebody that's joining late, they will be able to participate. So the first question, and you'll just type this in, it's open-ended, is can you think of one word to describe the Mad River? Any word you want. Enter it into the field in your phone, and they should appear on the screen. These are not only negative words. Perfect. Wandering, important, community. Give this a few more seconds. Unique, long. All right. Other responses. This will help frame our planning process a little bit. Fascinating and beautiful, unique, historic. I love that, historic. Hidden. It's a great word. Yep. Our outflow. And that I know there's more of us than the words appearing on the screen, but it looks like it's slowing down a little bit. So I may advance to the next question. Can you think of a word to describe the lakes in the watershed? So I just mentioned four of them, and there are others that are smaller that some of you may know of. So a word to describe the lakes. It's not a completely fair question because they're not all the same. So you'll be boxed into choosing one word anyway. Home, resource, man-made, community. Saw that before. Beautiful, excellent responses. We'll take a few more. Excellent. Asset, wonderful. Valuable resource. I like that. Many. Okay. Looks like that may have slowed down, so we'll go ahead. So think about all those responses as we step through the slides, because a lot of this discussion will be technical with some jargon, which isn't always the best fit for a presentation. But I think everything that everybody said is a better way to describe the watershed. So land use in the Mad River watershed is primarily forested and developed suburban and urban uses. There's a little bit of agriculture, not a whole lot. In general, we believe that forested land is believed beneficial for filtering pollution, slowing down stormwater generation, reducing flood risks. So there's many benefits to having forested land, and it is present in the watershed. At the same time, let's not fool ourselves. This is part of Waterbury, right? One of our most important industrial historic cities. And so that part of the watershed is highly developed. People lived in the watershed and worked in the watershed, worked nearby, in fact, in some of the mill buildings that were present. But that urban land does create challenges to water quality. So we're going to just step through some photographs that we've taken over the past few months and in previous years in the watershed. Thought we'd start with some of the outflows from the impoundments. So Cedar Lake outlets are on the left-hand side. You can see we're looking down the spillway. That's why it's that there's that sort of that paver look concrete. So that overflow from the lake has a place to go that doesn't cause erosion. But you can see the stream in the distance, which is the headwaters of the Mad River. The Hitchcock Lake outlet on the middle photograph, and then Scoville Reservoir, a view that many people have seen over the years. Oh, quite a few tributary streams in the watershed. So some of the streams pictured here are Tannery Brook, Lily Brook, and then a brook that we believe is called Crystal Brook based on the street that is nearby. And then we have seen many unnamed streams, such as the one on the lower right. Um, these are photographs that we've taken not only as part of this project, but as previous planning efforts in the region. And then, of course, the main stem of the river. So the upper left, the middle, and the lower right are from this fall, and then the lower left and the upper right are from probably about 15 years ago. We were out there taking photographs for some floodplain planning. And so you can see the lower left is, I think, near Sharon Road, and the upper right is near Garthwaite Road in Wolcott. So thinking about the land use maps that we just looked at in some of those photographs, you have three choices that you can pick one on this question. Land uses are appropriate relative to community and watershed needs. Land uses are slightly out of balance relative to community and watershed needs. And then land uses are very much out of balance relative to community and watershed needs. And we worded this question to include community and watershed needs because we're the community, we're also the watershed, right? We live there, but we also use the watershed for other reasons. So you get to pick one. And it's not a completely fair question because the answer might be different in Bristol versus Wolcott versus Waterbury. So that said, the winner so far is that land uses are appropriate relative to needs. Okay, shouldn't have said that. slightly out of balance. Right, 4 for appropriate and 6 for slightly out of balance. Okay. And it's good to see that nobody has selected very much out of balance. That would be a situation that would be hard to correct in a watershed-based plan. All right. I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. And Victoria, was I doing this one and passing it over to you, I believe?
Yeah, that sounds good. I can, if you want to start, or I can jump in.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do this one and then
Okay.
and I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah.
So, understanding impairment of the watershed and the watercourses in it. A waterway is considered impaired if it does not meet certain uses in the Connecticut water quality standards. So, the assumption is if a watercourse is impaired and it's not meeting those standards, there's negative impacts occurring to fish, wildlife, habitats in the river, or human health, or other uses such as fishing or recreation. And the Environmental Protection Agency, so EPA, and then of course DEEP, have adopted total maximum daily loads, TMDLs, that help characterize and describe the amount of pollution that can be present in a water body. And it also sets goals for reducing those. So there is a TMDL for the Mad River and for the Naugatuck River, which we'll look at on the next slide. I'll pass it over to Victoria for that.
Okay, so thank you, Dave. Um, right, so uh, just to kind of give you an idea of what we're going to be doing over the next few slides too, is we're going to kind of build up the understanding of the watershed-based plan. So first off, understanding the impairment, right? That's why we're here. Sections of, or segments as they're referred to, of the Mad River are impaired. We'll talk about why in just a second. And then this leads up to the need for the watershed-based plan, why we're creating this, right? To help identify and potentially address those impairments. So just to give you an idea, we're kind of building up the scenario here. So hang in there and we're going to kind of put pieces together. So like David mentioned, the TMDL, the total maximum daily load analysis, there's two of them that are relative to the watershed. So there's this Naugatuck River Watershed TMDL, which is a much larger scale than what we're looking at. So this one's a little bit older, and it initially found that three segments of the Mad River, which are the lower segments of the Mad River. We should have a map in a few minutes, but if not, it's those segments starting at the very southern end of the river in Waterbury, leading up to the reservoir, Lily Brook, and Lily Brook area. So it found that those three segments of the Mad River main stem are not supporting recreational uses due to elevated bacteria levels. So considered impaired since 2008. And then in 2012, a second TMDL, such a mouthful, second TMDL was completed for the Mad River, a little bit more of a focused area in comparison to the Naugatuck TMDL. So this also identified Lily Brook and Hitchcock Lake as a secondarily kind of impaired. So again, not supporting recreational uses due to elevated levels of bacteria. So essentially, water sampling was conducted, these elevated bacteria levels were identified, and these water bodies were designated as impaired for recreational uses. There are some other uses and there are other reasons for impairments, but these are the specific uses and reasons for impairments for this river and the lake. I was like, I know we have a map. So as you could see, we've got the main stem here, so almost 7 miles of the Mad River. So that doesn't mean that every single inch of this main stem, has high levels of bacteria or is poor quality, or you shouldn't go near it and don't look at it or anything like that. But those targeted areas that have had water sampling, have been kind of the culmination of the river, and those have identified the elevated bacteria levels and ultimately the designation. Same for Lily Brook. So that's a much shorter segment, as you could see in the upper right there in that circle. Lily Brook, just about 3/4 of a mile, and Hitchcock Lake, again, in the eastern part of the watershed. So there are other stretches throughout the watershed, of course, of Mad River. Those do not have the elevated bacteria levels, but we do take a look at those as part of this watershed-based plan, which we'll show you in just a few minutes, some sampling locations. So why does this matter? How do we kind of connect these impairments to the community? So like David said, it's not just the watershed, it's our community as well, right? You're living there, working there, playing and living in this watershed. So residents and visitors to Bristol, Waterbury, and Wolcott, they impact and their activities influence the health of the Mad River, Lily Brook, Hitchcock Lake, and all of the other water bodies, whether it's the other lakes or the small streams. All of these activities can influence the water quality. So like I mentioned, there's other, we mentioned it on here, and like I mentioned before, there are other designation reasons for impairments, designated impairments. So we mentioned here aquatic life uses. So there have been some identified impairments for aquatic life uses. So meaning, ecological impacts, fish habitat. Sometimes that can be due to, if there's dams on a stream or small impoundments. That way, fish can't migrate or they can't move. These ecosystems have kind of been disconnected. So something like that is also considered an impairment. So there's a variety of reasons that a stream or a lake could be impaired. One thing for the watershed-based plan is really focused on non-point source pollution. So you see that here, that's bolded, this NPS pollution. You'll see that throughout the rest of the presentation. This non-point source pollution, and maybe there's a graphic on the next slide. No, that's okay. We have one though in a second to talk about non-point source. So the primary reason, or the primary goal of the watershed-based plan is to understand and identify that non-point source pollution. So it's really those sources of pollutants that we don't know where they're coming from. We may know where they're coming from, but we don't entirely know exactly what is coming out of those sources. So again, we have a graphic and we can go over that in just a minute. So like I said, the purpose is to understand those reasons for impairment, but there's many other reasons that we're doing this watershed-based plan. So identifying other types of water quality concerns and challenges, right? It's not just limited to what's running off of our stream, running off of our parking lots and our pavements and our roadways. What other concerns are there outside of those non-point sources? We want to identify actions that can help reduce those impairments and also addressing those other water quality challenges. So identifying an array of actions, whether it's at the municipal level or actions that property owners can take or various neighborhoods. Identifying water quality, flood-related, and heat-related co-benefits. So really trying to understand if we're going to be doing a project, what's the maximum amount of benefit that we can get from one action? Can it help reduce flooding in the watershed? And can it reduce extreme heat, especially in some of those areas that are very impervious? Like David mentioned, the southern parts of the watershed and Waterbury, they're highly developed. Some of these areas with a lot of impervious pavement. Extreme heat is a concern. So if we're going to green some areas, let's try to maximize the benefits there. We also want to identify funding sources. So of course, we're going to identify actions, who's going to pay for them. That's always the number one question. So trying to connect the community and the communities and the COG to, to potential funding sources, identifying those and striving for consistency. So we always want to make sure we're consistent with ongoing municipal stormwater management efforts, MS4, and then making sure we're consistent with other planning efforts. So for example, the Waterbury Plan of Conservation and Development is currently underway. So we want to make sure we're, in line with other community plans and goals that are either underway or have already been kind of integrated into operations. So we're not contradicting anything. This was the graphic. So I knew it was here somewhere. So non-point source pollution, right? So you could see here we've got a few of these blue arrows. So some of the ones in the northern part of this watershed here are considered non-point sources. So these are pollutants that are, coming from the land from a variety of sources, but they're not necessarily concentrated at a single point. So we know there's runoff coming from, say, the suburban development or runoff coming from the cropland, right? We can see that water washing over those areas after a heavy rainstorm, but we don't necessarily know what's in that water because there could be anything in that roadway or on those croplands, right? So I think that's when we're talking about that in comparison to point sources, that's a direct discharge, right? So we know who's producing that discharge. I'm going to say not 100% certain, but we know what's in that discharge because we know where it's coming from. So we can understand a little bit better what's going into the stream. While those non-point sources, there's a little bit more of a question mark. We know where it's coming from, but maybe not always know what's in it. So that's the kind of the primary goal of the watershed-based plan is really to focus on those non-point, but we do, of course, consider those point sources. So this is actually a photo right from the watershed. Here we go. Can't get any better. We've got a non-point source on the left. So you could see that water from that roadway is anytime there's runoff, it's washing right from the road right into the stream. It's a dry stream at the moment, but it's running into the river area. But then on the right, we've got a point source. So there's a pipe, that's a direct discharge right into the water body. So it's a great understanding of we know what's coming, but we don't know what's coming from all locations. And then let's see. So some potential concerns, right? We're talking about the non-point source washing over, this runoff kind of washing over an area and picking up pollutants and debris and whatever that is. But what does that look like? It's going to look different in every part of the community. I mentioned Waterbury. David mentioned Waterbury. It's highly developed and a lot of impervious surface, but it's not all, attributed to that southern part of Waterbury. There's a lot of other potential concerns throughout the watershed, not just that area. So I'll kind of start at the top left here. So you could see this is a photo taken from the roadway, looking onto a residential property, which may look harmless. It's abutting the river, but of course there's runoff coming from that property into the stream. Oftentimes, there could be fertilizers, chemicals, and again, I'm not targeting this resident. It's all residential, kind of across the board residential challenges. But there's some things to consider. The photo in the top middle here looks like a very healthy, happy stream, which it is, but those are invasive species along the banks, right? We want to see those natural vegetated river banks, but we want to see them, with natural native vegetation. That's going to help, improve biodiversity, the ecological health, and just make it a stronger, happier stream. So something that you would look at and not think was a reason for impairment. There's still some ways to improve and fix upon that stretch of the stream. The top right, it's just debris, right? Folks littering and not disposing of trash. And so it seems minor, there's not a lot there, but this kind of compounds, and that litter, that trash enters your streams, it enters your rivers and your lakes, and oftentimes too much of it can harbor bacteria, and not let that stream kind of flush naturally. And ultimately that natural process could help reduce bacteria loads while trash and debris and buildup could harbor bacteria and increase your bacteria levels. Looking at the bottom left, you could see the kind of the power line. So that's just a picture of different land use, right? There's all different types of land uses throughout this watershed. There's going to be commercial and industrial and residential, some smaller agricultural operations. So again, all of these land uses are contributing in different ways. What's coming from these different land uses and operations is going to vary throughout the watershed. So we have to be cognizant of all of the different types of uses. The one in the middle with the guardrail, just looking at some erosion, right? This is something that looks very simple and harmless, but over time, all of this runoff is just kind of slowly bringing some of this sediment and silt into the stream, carrying bacteria, slowly increasing silt or sand levels, and again, kind of shifting that stream flow and potentially introducing increased or excess bacteria, pollutants, debris, trash, whatever might be on the roadway. And then the bottom right, we've got another point source. So there's a variety of concerns throughout the watershed. It's not just attributed to one location, one community, one street, neighborhood, whatever you'd like to think of. There's many different ways we have to think about concerns.
And Victoria, you didn't say it, but these are all actually from the Mad River
Yes,
Watershed.
great. Okay, thank you.
Sometimes they look like stock photos when I put them in there, but they're real. All right, go ahead.
All right. So, in my opinion, poor water quality is because of, and so, you could think about the entire Mad River. You could think about the one lake that you're more familiar with. And if there's, other thoughts, this is when you could throw something in the chat if you've got other ideas on, what could be causing decreased poor water quality, or I think we're small enough where, we could allow folks to unmute if they wanted to make a comment. But what do you see? What have you experienced in the watershed? I think this is a good opportunity to kind of gauge um, what folks think. So, good point. Is this an order of severity? So this should be a scale. So when you open up your phone, it should say 1 to 5. Um, Kind of let us know. So if you don't think, for example, commercial and industrial runoff is an issue, you would keep that at a 1. But if you think pet waste and waterfowl is the biggest kind of driver of poor water quality, throw that up to a 5. Um, so not order of importance, but you'll have a scale. So all the way to the left is you strongly disagree, and then all the way to the right is strongly agree.
So you could pick 5 for all of them. You could agree with all of them or none of them.
Right. I do hear someone. Did somebody have a comment? Let's see. All right.
Roads is winning.
Yep. Roads, rails, pet waste, and waterfowl. That's a challenge. Yep. Let's see. Commercial and industrial, stream bank kind of seem to be middle of the pack. Septic systems and accidental sewer connections. Okay, that's an interesting one.
Anybody want to say what they, so anyone choosing other things, this would be a good time to hear what you have in mind.
Yeah. Or like I said, we can throw that in the chat too. And there should be time at the end for questions and discussion too, if there's any other thoughts. What have we got? All right, so definitely road.
No,
Oh,
excuse me. Sorry.
yeah, go ahead. That's okay.
Yeah, just a couple. When I looked at other things, I was thinking of just sort of residential homeowner practices. I'm not sure. Excuse me. I'm not sure anything on here covers,
Yeah.
timely leaf pickup. Fertilizing lawns. I mean, just things that maybe people do that they could change those practices or shouldn't do, or I didn't see a category that would really fit that. So I put that under other in my own mind.
That's great. We were actually trying to draw that out of someone, and so thank you for being that person to offer that up. We're hoping some of you were thinking that in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point.
But interesting overall that roads is getting the most strongly agree, because that is something that's a challenge for watersheds in Connecticut, and especially.
Hello, can anybody hear me?
Yep. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah, yep. Go ahead. Is that Mark, I think?
This is
Yep.
Mark Pleasant, town engineer, Wolcott. I couldn't figure out how to post my thing, but primarily I'm in charge of the MFOW, are clearly the highest consideration. We don't have any septic, we don't have any sewer systems, so there's no cross connections. But the other point is what the gentleman just brought up: street cleaning, catch basin cleaning, street sweeping, catch basin cleaning are important parts of non-point source, and that's a big thing that we need to do, and we're actually doing it pretty good these days. As far as roads, I don't think that's a problem. Some stream back erosion. The biggest problem, I'm sorry to say, are pet waste. Ducks and dogs are killing us.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you guys feel like, I have a question for the group. When you're in the Mad River, do you ever see those little pet waste bags? Or they're green or blue, or sometimes they're hard to see, but if you start looking for them, you'll see them everywhere.
I have some
Let me just answer your question. No one walks in the Mad River.
there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm from Cedar Lake, Mike Guerrero. Most of our residents are septic. We have one house that's a member that has sewers, but it's pretty much 100% septic. And we have people who fertilize their lawns all the time. We've controlled the pet waste, I mean the waterfowl waste. We've had a lot of geese, but we go out and add all the eggs, so we limit their reproduction. So we have a very low population of geese. So our main problem is from septic and from fertilizers. And we've just done an ecological study, and it basically it mapped out where our highest phosphate concentrations are in the lake. And we're trying to figure out exactly where that's coming from. But I think our problem at Cedar Lake is mainly from fertilizers and from septic.
Understood. Is that report that you mentioned something that can be provided, or I don't believe we have it yet?
Yeah, we just had it done last month. I
Okay.
can provide it. Who should I send it to?
You can send it to me. I'll put my email in the chat, Mike. So
Okay.
Perfect.
And we also do water sampling to check for E. coli on a weekly basis. So, our bacterial levels are pretty good. We do have some blue-green algae issues. We haven't really tested for that much, and we're going to do that more next year.
All great info.
Now, from Bristol's perspective, Ray Rosinski, Director of Public Works, just to echo what the Cedar Lake Association, indicated, potentially one of the outcomes of this report would even be recommendations and, recommendation to, sewer the Cedar Lake area, would, perhaps be beneficial and even assist the city in attaining future funding.
Well, I can add to that.
Mm.
We had approached the town of Wolcott to provide sewers to connect to the Bristol system, but the administration felt it was not a good thing to push during an election year because it required the support of people, not necessarily lake members and waterfront owners, but all the surrounding neighborhoods around the lake. So it was killed. It was going to go out to bid, but the mayor decided not to do it. We did surveys. We had people showing up at meetings, but the town of Wolcott was unwilling to do that for us. We were going to connect to the Bristol system, but they didn't want to invest the money.
All right, these are definitely things that we'll keep in mind as we're developing actions and, targeting specific neighborhoods and locations for, um, actions and load reduction strategies, which we'll talk about in just a minute. We'll talk a little bit more about what the plan entails, which actually includes some land use and pollutant load reduction stuff. So once we start to kind of do all of this data analysis, hopefully that'll help create narratives around some of these challenge areas and align with the issues that are being seen. So this is great info to kind of help support all of that. That'll be coming soon.
Here's your slide.
Yep, there we go. So there's going to be 9 elements as part of this watershed-based plan. That's what's required from the EPA in order for it to be, you can develop a watershed-based plan, but if you're going to and you're going to go to EPA for funding, it has to align with their requirements. So that's these 9 elements. So I'll go through them quickly. So number 1 is impairment. We've talked about what an impairment is. This plan will have to identify causes and potential sources for the pollution. We may not be able to point fingers exactly to locations, but this is definitely a good starting point for understanding at least some maybe hotspot areas or certain land use types or parts of the watershed that might be really driving issues. Number 2 is load reduction, so reduction from management measures. So when we say load reduction, what we do is we kind of develop a baseline of pollutant loads. So understanding the amount of pollutant that is washing into the river, into the water bodies, from the watershed. And that's based on some desktop analysis using land use types throughout the watershed, understanding existing practices. So whether that's street sweeping and catch basin cleaning, I'm glad that got brought up. Um, and just to understand, what might be being introduced into the river based on what it's surrounded by. And then we would introduce management measures. So number three, that's ways to reduce the pollutants. Um, that's there's a lot of kind of technical numbers and whatnot that would be attributed to those management measures. But one example is right to sewer some septic areas, right? So if we were to do that, how much would those pollutant loads be reduced? So that's kind of the sort of thing that would be built into this watershed-based plan. Number four is technical and financial assistance. So again, trying to link up actions with assistance and funding mechanisms that can help get some of these projects implemented. Number five is public education and information. So this meeting right here, the story map, like David mentioned, we have a survey, we'll have other opportunities to participate. So part of it is to help develop this plan, but also part of it is just to raise awareness and make sure that residents and community members throughout the watershed understand the need for the plan and their impacts on a small or a large scale. Number six is schedule. So we'll propose a management measure timeline. So we're going to identify those measures to help reduce that load. What should that schedule look like? What can be implemented sooner than later? And what's maybe a bigger scale project that's, long term, down the pipeline. 7, 8, and 9 are all kind of similar. They kind of work together, I should say. So we'll identify milestones. These are measurable milestones to some degree, whatever that looks like for that management measure. But it's to help determine whether or not that measure is actually working. Then there's performance, which will determine the progress toward water quality standards. So that's reducing that impairment and working toward acceptable standards at deep when they've got their water quality standards, so we're working toward those. And then number 9 is monitoring. So a plan to evaluate the effectiveness over time, right? We don't want this plan to sit on a shelf. We want to make sure that it's being implemented and progress is being made, no matter how small that is. So we'll develop a monitoring plan. So there's a lot that goes into it other than just saying, hey, this is what's impacting the river. We want to make sure that we're kind of setting everything else up for success with supporting kind of data and information as well as performance and monitoring. So
And
those are the 9
Victoria, I
elements.
just wanted to add,
Yep.
in terms of monitoring, we hope that the folks on our steering committee and anyone else who's here tonight will want to continue with us long term, because the hope is to transition the steering committee working on this plan into a long-term stewardship committee that will do the monitoring and hopefully implement the plan as they're able. But no one needs to make a commitment tonight, so just thinking for the future.
Or do they? Maybe that's a Mentimeter question at the end. They just don't know it yet. No, I'm kidding. Okay, yeah, so that's great, and that's the thing, right? This will hopefully kind of snowball into and connect some of the efforts that are ongoing throughout the watershed, and we'll keep all of that moving. So I did mention some of the water quality sampling a little bit before when we were talking about impairments and how that impairment was identified and designated. And that, even though the southern reaches of the Mad River are those that are impaired, we are going to do some sampling in the northern reaches as well, particularly around Cedar Lake. We're going to be going above Scoville Reservoir. So you can see some of these stars on the map here. They're not aligned we've got the orange and blue and pink and green. It's a small map, but it is on the story map. So if you wanted to look at it, we'll show you a little bit, show you how a little bit later. But so we're going to have some water quality sampling in locations that aren't along those impaired segments to really try to build a story around what's going on throughout the watershed as best we can. So these sample locations that are along Mad River, we've got some along Tannery Brook, Lily Brook, and then around each of the large bodies of water. They were really selected on accessibility, right? Not every stretch of the river is going to be accessible. So we want to make sure that we can safely get to that location for a sample. We did target the impaired segment locations strategically based on maybe where a tributary joins, or maybe where it's coming out of a conduit or something like that. we're assuming that the results will kind of bracket conditions, right? So we're thinking, hey, let's sample here to kind of maybe catch the beginning or catch the end of a potential impairment source. So again, like I said, maybe where a tributary joins, if it's just before or just after that tributary, if one sample is higher or lower, then maybe we can target, maybe that tributary is the source or something like that.
May I add
Um,
something?
yeah, go ahead.
In Wolcott, there used to be a dump at the end of Bound Line Road, and that dump is north of Peterson Park. That dump is no longer open, but there's a landfill there. At the bottom of the dump is the Mad River. So anything coming out of that old dump is going to get into the river, and that's in between Cedar Lake and Peterson Park. Maybe something that you may want to look at.
Interesting. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. Make a note. Okay. And then the last bullet here is characterization of water where it flows out of lakes. So lake sampling in itself and compared to river sampling is just a little bit of a different kind of ball game. And it also would really include many samples to fully characterize what's going on in a lake. But to really start this process and give a strong foundation for the watershed-based plan, we're going to be sampling at the outflows of the lakes just to kind of give a general characterization of at least what's going on and what's flowing out of these lakes into the stream. So we're trying to build a solid baseline picture of what's going on in the watershed by water quality, and then hopefully we can give further management strategies or recommendations for you know, long-term ongoing sampling or maybe increased sampling at certain locations based on kind of some of these characteristic findings. All right, I would like to see more of this in the watershed. So we've talked a little bit about what the plan is going to do. Not a lot, but just to give you an overview of those 9 elements. So what I would like to see more of, this is that strongly agree or strongly disagree, that scale of 1 to 5. So what are some actions that you would like to see going on the watershed? We talked about what an impairment might be, so how would we fix those impairments or try to, right? So that might be street sweeping and catch basin. It sounds like that's already ongoing, which is great. Maybe we need to be more aggressive with that. Pet waste and waterfowl management, elimination of stormwater discharge from pipes. Let's see, native vegetation and trees along streams. So like I mentioned, the invasive issue. Green infrastructure that reduces stormwater runoff. We didn't talk about that too much, but that might be small bioswales along a roadway, street trees that would kind of catch some water and maybe retain it or detain it before it enters the river or stormwater drain. So those are kind of some more natural ways to reduce runoff. We've got redevelopment strategies that reduce pavement. So, cutting the size of parking lots and things like that to help reduce impervious. So the reduction of that impervious pavement would ultimately reduce the flow into the water bodies. Setting aside open space, similar idea, keeping green, letting water percolate naturally. And then if you've got other thoughts, definitely chuck those into the chat or, feel free to unmute like we did before. We could have some comments made. So it's kind of a neck and neck race here. I feel like when we do this one, it's the game with the water gun at a carnival where you're trying to blow up the balloon and you're trying to see who's going to get there fastest. That's just the way my brain works. But litter control, that's a good one, right? Litter control is definitely a big one. Let's see, any others in the chat?
Interesting that some folks are voting for setting aside open space. So that implies that there is more open space to set aside, which is great.
Yep. Christine, definitely education. I agree.
Okay.
Alright.
Go to the next slide.
I
Yeah,
also
think
like
so.
Tom's answer of litter control. I know one thing that I was talking about with David is that the nips on the side of the road are just totally ubiquitous, and all those wash into the streams, and that's pretty rough.
Right. I do see a hand from
Hi.
Anne. Go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, when it's true that there are times there's no more space to set aside for open space, but if there's a place that might have been, oh, we could develop, take away that place as being a place that you could develop on. Um, and if there's any place that gets torn down that maybe that used to be industrial, that you could turn around and say, hey, we don't want it to be industrial anymore.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And that really ties in with kind of that smart redevelopment, right? So if we're gonna, be doing tear downs or redeveloping a property, try to do some sort of set aside. No, that's a great point. Did I see another hand or no? Was I making that up? Maybe making that up. Okay.
So Victoria, you can just touch on this real quick because we'll
Yeah,
show it at the end.
sure. Um, yeah, okay, so public engagement. Um, so like I mentioned, that's a big part of the watershed-based plan. So a few things just to introduce here tonight. We have a story map, or it's just a web page, kind of a landing page for this project. And we'll go over it in a second. It's got some resources, but really it's also got a survey. So we want to make sure that residents, any sort of community member in the watershed, whether you work or live or use the watershed, takes a few minutes to take that survey to let us know, your concerns and what you'd like to see. Um, We'll be doing a few other, or at least one or two other, I believe, public engagement meetings like this. So that'll include kind of the introductory, but also we'll be doing one later on to present some of those management strategies. We'll go over the findings and the results of some of the water sampling and the other desktop analysis and, where is this plan going? Um, so keep your eye out for that information as we go forward. I'm not going to switch to the story map just yet. Right, so here's the schedule. So these are the tasks. Project planning is obviously ongoing, coordination is ongoing. We did have to submit a quality assurance project plan, so that's called a QAP. This quality assurance project plan was executed a few months ago. That basically let us be able to start the project. We had to wait on that, and that really guides the project, making sure that all of our data collection, is adhering to certain standards. C, D, and E are really the bulk of this plan. We'll be looking at existing conditions. We're going to be looking at the sampling. Um, the sampling will start next spring, but we've already done a little bit of recon throughout the watershed and taken a look at our sampling sites just to get an idea of the activities going on in the watershed. And then the watershed base plan and the implementation strategy, including the development and a report, will all start next year in the fall. So it's a long planning process, and public outreach and engagement, of course, will also be ongoing. So it's a long planning process, but I'm confident that there's a lot of work going into this that's hopefully going to build a really good narrative for this watershed and what needs to be done. So hang in there throughout the process.
And some of the time frame is because of the sampling. So we don't want to collect all the samples in 1 month. We want to collect samples from April through
Right,
October.
it's a good point. So yeah, so ultimately that's the presentation for the evening. Thank you to Deep, and of course EPA, for funding. Deep has been administering. They'll also be working with us very closely throughout the entire project. City of Bristol, Town of Wolcott, and City of Waterbury, of course, they are on the steering committee, and we'll be working closely with them as well. And then all other steering committee members as well. We've got folks from the lake associations, other nonprofit organizations, and I believe the Conservation District. So there's a lot of folks coming to the table here to take part in this project. So we, of course, want to say thank you to all of those folks.
And for the funding from Bristol, Waterbury, and Wolcott as well.
Correct, yes, and the funding from, yes, yes, yes. Yes, all of the funding is always greatly appreciated for any project.
I have
Do
a
you have the story
question
map
about
up?
I have a question about funding.
Yep.
Cedar Lake is a private lake. I know Hitchcock and Chestnut Hill are a part of the land trust. Are we eligible for any of this funding since we're private?
So after the plan, if grants are obtained from EPA under this program, in general, the municipalities would, or the nonprofits would be the applicants. So it just depends on what funding source it is. The EPA 319 grant is typically accessed by towns, right? But it could be nonprofits are eligible, and there are other kinds of grants. For example, the Deep Climate Resilience Fund that have different eligibility. So um, that'll be something that's part of the plan is a cross-reference between grants and who can apply.
Yeah, we're not technically a nonprofit, unfortunately, so I don't know if we would qualify.
Okay.
Also, I did send the study to Christine. Please let me
Thank
know if
you.
you didn't get it.
Yeah,
Distribute it to everybody if you like.
absolutely. We're all set with that. Thank you so much, Mike.
Okay, that's all I have.
Victoria, do you have the story map up?
I do. There was one other question that popped up. It was from Paula. Will this impact citizen taxes or cost us extra? Um, as of right now, I'll say no, right? Because this project is being funded by those sources that we just mentioned. Any future projects that are, you know, we recommend funding sources for all of our management measures, in hopes that, whether it's municipalities or, nonprofits or anything like that can leverage outside funding sources. So, this planning process itself, is already funded. So, hopefully that answers that.
And a lot of the projects that come after this, let's just say, for example, that a parking lot's being replaced by green infrastructure,
Mm.
and let's say it's happening in Wolcott. If the town is the applicant and it receives a grant for most of that, there'll be a part of it that's not grant funded, and the town would need to fund that through its public works or capital improvement expenditures. So, to that extent, in the future, there could be projects that are partly taxpayer funded, but it's to be determined.
Right. Okay, I do have the story map. I can jump over to that and then I'll just
Yep.
share that quickly.
And let me just add that if folks need to jump, we are finished with the main part of the presentation, and you can close that Mentimeter. And for those who have time, you're welcome to stay on and look at the story map with us.
Yeah, so I'll just go through it really quickly just to show you folks how to use it. So there's a couple tabs up at the top. We've of course got an About tab that really talks about what a watershed-based plan is. More information on what that is. There's going to be links all throughout. So if you want to read up a little bit more on what a watershed-based plan is or what impairments are, you can take a look at that. There's some maps, just to get a better understanding of the watershed, and then there's also the impairment map, which I can go up to. In a minute. I'll do the impairment map in a minute. So we've got the watershed history. So if folks are really curious about what the watershed used to look like, I was fiddling around with this and actually zoomed up in on Cedar Lake. So we've got 1934 aerial versus 1990, just so you can understand, what development, how development has changed in, just under 100 years, right? And so it doesn't look like a lot, but all of these, small developments and these small neighborhoods over time, um, you know, these impervious surfaces are slowly contributing more runoff volume into water bodies. So just kind of a fun tool to look at the watershed in a historic way. The 1934 to the 1990 slider, which is the one I'm kind of going back and forth with here, really shows those changes over that 60, 55 year time frame. There's one down a little bit further on the page. This one is between 1990 and 2023. The development changes are a little bit less obvious because a lot of the development had already occurred, but it's still fun to kind of take a look at, how things have changed over the years. So that's kind of for the history buffs that are really interested in how the watershed has changed over time. We've got the impairments, so a little bit more on non-point source pollution, what the potential sources are. It talks about the Mad River Watershed impairments, and if you really are interested and want to learn so much more about the TMDLs, we do have those linked down here as well. So you could take a look at what's going on and what are some of the suggested strategies from the TMDL to help with those impairments. How Can I Help is a really great resource for you to understand and for residents and community members to understand what they can do on their own just to kind of chip in and play a part. Disposing of wastes and chemicals correctly, keeping keeping pet waste and litter out, having septics inspected, and controlling sediment. So those are just some of the topics, but there's plenty of links here to other community municipal resources and some other resources at the state level as well. So if you're interested in doing some things at home, this is a really great resource page. And then, of course, we've got the survey. I was going to say, don't tell me it's not going to load when I need it to. So we've got the survey up here. It's a pretty short survey. It asks who you are, where you're from, what you're doing, whether you live or kind of use the watershed for recreation. But then it does have some open-ended questions, I believe, at the end. Oh, right, we've got some multi-selection, similar to some of the Menti questions that we asked tonight. You know, what do you think are the challenges? But also we want to know what your other thoughts are. So that should only take a few minutes, this survey. And I can drop the link I'll drop the link for this directly in the chat so you can go right to the story map tonight. But I believe this is also linked on the NVCOG website, correct? If not, we'll get it up there.
Nope, not yet. I need the link
Right,
as
okay.
well.
That's right. Okay, I thought so. Um, so yes, that's the story map. There's not a lot, but there's not a lot to it, but there's a lot of good information on there. Um, and
Christine,
with
thank you for answering questions in the chat. You're way ahead of me. When you're sharing your screen, it's hard to also check it. Do folks feel like their answers are, do they see their answers in the chat? Anything else anybody wants to ask verbally? We are just starting, so this process will go on through all of next year.
All right. That brings us to just before 7. I think we did pretty good.
Let me just, there's a question about parking that's come up a couple
Oh,
times.
yeah.
So we would only look to
Oh.
be reducing parking where it is not being utilized. There are areas that we know in most communities where there's some available parking that's not being used and it can be returned to nature. So that's what we'd be looking for, not changing parking that is needed.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Support or two, but yeah, some good comments here. All right.
Well, we're at 7 o'clock almost, so folks are welcome to drop. Please, everyone, take the survey and look at the story map and watch the NVCOG website for future meetings.
Yeah, thank you so much for attending, and especially thank you to our steering committee members who joined us. This was wonderful. Thank you.
I have a question about the survey. Is it
Oh,
at the
please.
end of the link? How do I
Yeah,
go?
so you'll navigate once you get to the story map, you'll see that there are tabs, and the
Okay.
final tab should be survey
Mhm.
Okay, very
at
good.
the top. Yeah.
And we can do that after the meeting, right?
Yeah, it'll be open for a few months, so you've got
Okay.
time, but you're welcome to take it tonight. I would love to have the first entry tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.